Saskatchewan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to begin my remarks today on just a point of relative refutation, because listening to the debate today, we've heard some discussion around inequality in Canada. I think the member for Saanich Gulf Islands, in fact, used the phrase a crisis of inequality. And I think we need to review the record about inequality. I see this bill, frankly, is going in the wrong direction. But we have a really positive record as a government over the last 10 years, in fact, about addressing inequality, as the numbers clearly show. At the beginning of our mandate, as I mentioned before, we lowered the GST, which is the tax that all Canadians pay. We also cut the lowest marginal tax rate. This is a very different approach from the approach that the government is taking. We lowered the lowest marginal tax rate and the sales tax. Now, the best way to measure inequality, in my view at least, is through something called intergenerational earnings elasticity. What that means is people's ability to move between different income brackets across generations. What are your chances of being a wealthier person even if you had relatively lower income parents, and vice versa? And if you look at the data on intergenerational earnings elasticity, I'll just refer members to a great paper written by Miles Korach from the U of O here. The numbers are clear that Canada is near the top when it comes to equality, when it comes to intergenerational earnings elasticity. Canada gets a score of 0.19, where low is good. We're actually fourth in the world. We're far ahead of the United Kingdom, of France, of Italy, of countries with a very different social system. We're also ahead of the United States. So we've got a combination of factors in Canada that's good for equality. I would argue it's a combination of certain necessary social programs in areas like education and healthcare, but also of economic opportunity, and historically what we've had over the last 10 years of limited but effective regulation of business and low business taxes. This environment has been good for equality, and it's one thing for members to throw out phrases like crisis and inequality, but if you look at the data, specifically I would argue around intergenerational earnings elasticity, we see that Canada is, right now at least, in a very good spot. But I will argue, and I agree with our colleagues in the NDP, that with respect to equality, this bill does not move in the right direction, because it cuts taxes in certain categories, but not in others. Many low-income Canadians and moderate-income Canadians will not benefit at all. To be frank, I am very concerned about this bill because you might call this a Liberal promise wrecking ball. It is one bill that breaks through what were the clear election commitments of the Liberal Party. Now, the Liberal Party committed in two key categories when it comes to fiscal things. They promised to run three modest deficits of $10 billion, balance the budget after that, and ensure all tax changes were revenue neutral. And they also promised to cut taxes for, in their words, the middle class and those hoping to join it, and to pay for those tax cuts with tax increases on higher income earning Canadians. And we see very clearly that this bill makes utter nonsense of these two commitments. So first of all, in terms of their commitment to run only three modest deficits of $10 billion, balance the budget after that, and ensure all tax changes were revenue neutral. Well, we know that the deficits have ballooned significantly since the election, that even before new spending is promised, we're going to be running an $18.4 billion deficit in the 2016-17 fiscal year, and a $15.5 billion deficit in 2017-18. And that's again before new spending. Here's what the finance minister, though, had to say about that. He said, a less ambitious government might see these conditions as a reason to hide, to make cuts, or be overly cautious. But our government might see that the economic downturn makes our plans to grow the economy even more relevant than they were a few short months ago. May I say, first of all, Mr. Speaker, that this is a rather strange definition of ambition, to leave the cupboard bare for the next generation. Let's define our ambition by how much we leave to the next generation, not by how little we leave to the next generation. Now, the Prime Minister has said that Canada has room to run these new massive deficits because of our relatively low debt-to-GDP ratio at the federal level. And it is true that our government left Canada with a low debt-to-GDP ratio, in fact, a reduced debt to GDP ratio compared with when we first took office. But the combined federal, provincial, and municipal debt to GDP ratio is actually alarmingly high. It's over 90%. It's in the same ballpark as the debt to GDP ratio in the US and the UK. Again, if you combine federal, provincial, and municipal debt. So we actually don't have room at all to run these massive, new, reckless deficits. And of course, this large debt to GDP ratio, including the provincial level, is led by the very large deficit and debt here in the province of Ontario. The policies of the Kathleen Wynne government, which I think unfortunately this government wishes to emulate, have made Ontario the most indebted sub-sovereign borrower on earth. We cannot go in that direction at the federal level as well. We are already significantly weighed down by that combination of federal, provincial, and municipal debt. Now C2 makes tax changes which have a significant cost to our treasury, and by ignoring the value of tax-free savings accounts, they also have a significant cost to our economy. This bill cuts tax-free savings accounts and lowers some taxes while raising others, but it's not revenue neutral. According to the Parliamentary Budget Officer, it costs the Treasury $1.7 billion per year. It's clear that this government is not sticking to their $10 billion per year deficit commitment. They have no serious plan to balance the budget in year 4. Their tax changes are not revenue neutral, and estimates are now that they will increase instead of lowering the debt to GDP ratio. Over the next 4 years, it is projected that they will increase the deficit, that they will increase the debt more than we did in 10 years. They will increase the debt to GDP ratio, and they will do it not because of a financial crisis, but because they have no regard for the importance of planning for the next generation. They are spending today with no regard for the future at all, and certainly, again, making nonsense of their initial budget commitment. Now, they said as well they would cut taxes for the middle class and those hoping to join it. Well, the details don't measure up to that commitment at all. Their proposal is a modest tax reduction for those making between $45,000 a year and $90,000 a year. Individuals making less than $45,000 a year get nothing. Perhaps families with a combined income approaching $90,000 a year get nothing. And whether those people consider themselves middle class or those hoping to join it, they in fact lose because of these changes. And even individuals at the low end of that tax bracket may be worse off because of the other changes this government is bringing in with respect to tax-free savings accounts. Now, those who benefit most, as has been pointed out, are those making over $90,000 per year, perhaps families with a combined income approaching $200,000 a year. That's the reality of these changes. As a member of Parliament, I know I make a good salary, and my wife, as a part-time physician, does as well. With 2 incomes, each individually less than $200,000 a year, we are in the group that benefits most from these changes. But the fact is, members of Parliament and senators don't need tax cuts. Canadians do, hardworking, middle-class Canadians, and those who are hoping to join it. The rhetoric just doesn't match the reality in this bill at all. Instead, what they're doing by reducing tax-free savings account limits, they're hurting those Canadians who need it the help the most. Here are the real numbers on tax-free savings accounts. Over 65% of tax-free savings account holders make less than $60,000 a year. Almost half of TFSA holders make less than $40,000 a year, and over half of those who currently max out their TFSAs make less than $60,000 per year. This government somehow behaves as if those making over $90,000 a year count as middle class for the purposes of their rate cut, but those making less than $60,000 a year for the purposes of tax-free savings accounts count as wealthy. This is a clear paradox in their plan. Why are they cutting benefits for those who make less than $60,000 a year while increasing benefits for those who make more than $90,000 a year? Again, this bill drives a stake through their election commitments. They promised to run 3 modest deficits of $10 billion, balance the budget after that, and ensure tax changes were revenue neutral. That was and is nonsense. They promised to cut taxes for, in their words, the middle class and those hoping to join it, and to pay for those tax cuts with tax increases on higher income Canadians. Again, clearly, if you look at the numbers, this is total nonsense. Mr. Speaker, those of us who are on the Conservative side of the House, and even our colleagues in the NDP, we have convictions, we stick to them, we try and advance them. But it's clear that this Liberal government already has no regard for their platform. They've broken more promises in a mere 4 months than we did in 10 years. So shame on them for that.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
A few words come to my mind, Mr. Speaker, and one of them is you got to be kidding. Mr. Speaker, you know, it was just a couple of weeks ago I was at a local restaurant and someone says to me, you know, your Prime Minister, and I can't say the Prime Minister's name because it would be unparliamentary inside the chamber at this point in time, but in reference to the new Canadian Prime Minister, and said that, you know, in the first 100 days that he has accomplished more to making our society a better place to live than the previous Prime Minister in his entire 10 years. I don't know where the member gets off with the comments that he has put on, Mr. Speaker. But let me ask the member. You know, we talk about an election platform because he seemed to be focused on that. Take a look at what Bill C-2 does. It fulfills a major party platform. It will, in fact, give money to Canada's middle class. That is something in which it was promised, and this bill is a promise kept from a platform issue. It said that we were going to give an increase to those that are Canada's wealthiest, that 1%. Again, it is a promise that is kept. But let's not give up hope, Mr. Speaker, because there's more that's coming on March 22 that's going to give even that much more in terms of Canada's middle class and those aspiring to be a part of the middle class, Mr. Speaker, through the Canada Child Benefit Program. We have seen the greatest redistribution of income inequality, trying to address that issue in the last 120 days plus, Mr. Speaker. Be a little bit more patient, and there's a lot more to come. Would the member not recognize, at the very least, that this government has done more for the Canadian middle class than the previous government did in the previous 10 years?
Honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable member as well for his speech. He's alluded, and other members have alluded to, surprises in the budget. Well, we frankly have had quite enough surprises from this government already, and it's great to hear the anecdote about the member going to a restaurant and finding someone there who agrees with him. But the fact is, if you look at the numbers, if you look at the facts, I talked about numbers with regards to inequality. I talked about numbers with regard to the tax changes. The Liberals have trouble with this. They have trouble with the numbers. And it's clear from their budget policy that they have trouble with the numbers. But those who benefit from their tax change are those making between $45,282 a year and $90,563 a year. Those are the only ones who get a tax cut. If you're making less than that $45,000 mark, you pay more because you lose the benefit of tax-free savings accounts. This bill benefits members of Parliament who make less than $200,000 a year but more than $90,000 a year. It benefits other people in that higher income category. It does not benefit those who need it most. These are the lines that the Liberal have, but they simply do not match up with the reality of the numbers.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Regina Leuven.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would thank the member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, for introducing the concept of intergenerational mobility into this debate. And I would agree that that's a very important measure of equality of opportunity. Certainly we would not aspire to have a country in which someone could become Prime Minister largely on the strength of their father having been Prime Minister. One of the major threats to intergenerational mobility are inheritances. And a concern that I would express about tax-free savings accounts is that they could actually aggravate the amount of wealth that is conferred based on heredity, because not only will people be able to accumulate wealth over the years, but the Conservatives would like them to accumulate much more wealth tax-free. And I wonder if the member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, shares this concern about intergenerational inequity being aggravated by tax-free savings accounts. Thank you.
Member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It certainly is always a pleasure to engage in dialogue with this member, an experienced debater and someone who has a good understanding of economics, although it has clearly led him to take a wrong turn at some point. Now, with respect to his comments about intergenerational earnings elasticity, I appreciate his affirmation of the value of that as a metric, because it really vindicates the approach that our government took. Now, with regard to the issue of tax-free savings accounts and how they operate in the context of inheritance, this is an important point, because tax-free savings accounts are disproportionately used by those who are on the lower income scale. We know this just because of the tax treatment of RRSPs versus TFSAs, that there's a real incentive for people to use them in particular who are on the lower end. The numbers are clear. I mentioned them before. over 65% of tax-free savings account holders make under $60,000 a year. Over half of those who max out their tax-free savings accounts make under $60,000 per year. So we want to see people be able to pass on an inheritance to the next generation. We see value in that, but given the disproportionate use of tax-free savings accounts by middle and low-income Canadians, that the advantageous tax treatment of them in the context of inheritance is a pro-equality measure, and that's why we support maintaining and enhancing the tax.
Resuming debate, the honourable member.